Like it or not, the senior and elderly population is vulnerable to negligence committed by medical professionals, nursing home and assisted living facilities, pharmaceutical and medical device companies, insurance companies, and everyday individuals and businesses. The Injured Senior Podcast is here to help. Steve Heisler is the creator of the National Injured Senior Law Center and has been advocating for seniors' rights for over 20 years. You have questions, and Steve Heisler has answers. This is the Injured Senior Podcast.
Hello, friends. This is Steve Heisler, attorney and CEO of the National Injured Senior Law Center. I am also your host of this podcast, the Injured Senior Podcast. Now, I have with me today Ellen Platt. Ellen is the founder and owner of the Option Group, LLC, which is based out of Hunt Valley, Maryland. Now, Ellen is both a certified rehabilitation counselor and a certified professional geriatric aging life care manager with a span of 30 years providing care management and case coordination services to those with catastrophic injury, chronic diseases, and disabilities. Out of that experience, Ellen created the Option Group to address similar needs and services specifically for seniors or those with special conditions and their family caregivers and guardians. Her primary practice focuses on working with caregivers and aging families and the large variety of issues and needs specific to that population. Ellen, it is a pleasure to have you on the show. How are you doing today?
Good, thanks. Thank you, Steve, for having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Ellen, I don't think my introduction of you did you any justice. Can you tell our listeners what a geriatric care manager does?
Sure. Sometimes it's actually easier to say what we don't do than what we do. Care managers cover a wide variety of tasks. In essence, we help people navigate longevity, whatever that means for them. We go to the person where they are in that stage of life, and we help them navigate the system. It's really a holistic, client-centered approach of caring for people. And we look out for people with a variety of health challenges. So essentially, we'll do an assessment. We'll make recommendations for care and really come up with an individualized care plan. And then we monitor it and tweak it to make sure that it's meeting their needs. And we also do some health education and advocacy, family coaching, and crisis intervention. So we cover a wide scope of variety of tasks and a variety of people and situations.
Got it. So by the fact that you're actually called geriatric care managers, that would more than imply that you're focusing on seniors and the elderly. Would that be correct?
Sure. We do a lot of work with seniors. We find that families are needing assistance with a loved one who is declining cognitively or physically, and they need help navigating the situation. My background is in rehabilitation counseling, physical medicine and rehabilitation. And we also have a team of social workers and nurses. So we are able to tailor the case manager to the person's situation. And we do end up with some younger folks who have perhaps MS or mental health issues or traumatic brain injury or catastrophic injury. And so they may not fall under that quote unquote geriatric population, but they still need an advocate and someone to help them navigate the resources and navigate their care.
Great. What issues would you say are generally most important to the senior and elderly community?
I think one of the biggest things is that people want to know what their options are. They want to understand the options given their situation, and they want to understand why they might pick one over the other. So we're able to educate them, give them ideas of what the options are, what are the costs associated with those options, who pays for it? Is it an insurance paid benefit, or is it something that they're paying out of pocket? And we're helping them to kind of pull together this holistic care plan and create a solution that's going to help them remain safe, as independent as possible, and functioning as well as they can, and maintaining their dignity in the process.
That's all good stuff. So You work with seniors and elderly individuals who've suffered catastrophic injuries, chronic diseases, and disabilities. Can you tell our listeners what are some of the significant injuries that you deal with and see the most?
Obviously, with the aging population, we see dementia quite a bit, all different types of dementia, and also things like Parkinson's or stroke that tend to happen more frequently with people who are advanced in age. But we deal with folks who have had traumatic brain injuries or concussions, perhaps a medical malpractice case or catastrophic injury that left them with significant residual disabilities, and they sustained a permanent injury of some type, and now they need to reclaim their lives, and they need to have the best quality of life possible and function as well as they can given their new circumstances. So they often need somebody to help them navigate that process.
So, that senior or elderly individual who has sustained a catastrophic injury, at what point during the process do either that particular individual, injured individual, or their family, at what point do they normally contact a certified geriatric manager?
More often than not, people are contacting us when there's been a crisis. That's why they are reaching out to us, because they feel they're at a point where they don't know what they don't know, and they don't know how to navigate the various systems involved. So we often get a call when there's a time of crisis, and we are able to jump in pretty quickly to do that assessment and come up with recommendations and stabilize the situation. I mean, first things first, safety issues. So, for example, if somebody has dementia and the family is living in another city and that person is wandering, then they need somebody to jump in right away, make sure that they're safe. So we come in and we stabilize things, but then we also look short term, what do we need to start thinking about? And then ideally long term, what do we need to start planning on, and how do we do that? So that's where we come in with that full assessment, looking at the clinical picture and figuring out what it is that they need. And care managers really have 8 core areas of expertise that we work within as we're navigating healthcare for people. And so we look at the clinical picture, their health and disability, but we also look at the financial picture. Is this a sustainable scenario that we're coming up with so that they can move forward and be able to maintain that level of care? We look at their housing situation. Is it conducive to their condition, living in that housing situation? Do they have family that's local, or do they have family at all? We work with a lot of elder orphans who don't have family to help navigate, and we're the only
Right,
people who have.
right.
At local resources, we do advocacy, we look at their legal documents to make sure that they have their planning documents in place, and we often do crisis intervention. So we're again called at a time when there's a crisis. Ideally, we'd like to be called before the crisis so that we can do some planning and people don't have to make a knee-jerk reaction to something. They have some options in place.
So, what are some examples of crises that you see a lot?
Often we'll see a husband and a wife living together, and maybe one spouse has a lot of physical disability, and there's another spouse that has the cognitive disability. And together they make one person. But if something happens to one of them, things start unraveling quickly. Prior to that, they were compensating for each other's difficulties and were able to maintain, their living situation. But if something happens to that, it topples pretty quickly, and families are looking to us to help right things.
Great. Yeah. So my dad is 87 and my mom is 84, and they definitely have their skill sets. And my mom's her best skill set, well, she's got a lot of great skills, but the skill set that my dad relies upon is that she handles everything financial. So if something happened to my mother,
Mhm.
and my dad or I reached out to a geriatric care manager, would one of the services that you would provide would be to find somebody who would be able to kind of step in for my mom as far as like making sure the checks get out and make sure that everything financially is up to speed.
Yes, exactly. We would do that. we would be able to link them with somebody who would be able to step in quickly and be able to keep them fiscally organized and make sure that they're not receiving collections notices and things like that, or getting things ready for their accountant.
Got it. Got it. So, I guess when you have elderly or seniors who have sustained a catastrophic injury, there's a very good chance that they're going to have to get placed in a nursing home. My question to you is, why should a caretaker or a family member, what's the important part of consulting with a geriatric care manager before their loved one is placed in a nursing home?
Yeah, well, lots of times, most of the time, I would venture to say, people say they want to stay at home. There's no place like home. So we're able to help them bring in resources and services and put in that infrastructure that allows them to stay at home longer. The good news is there's lots of ways to do that and at a pretty high level of care. But sometimes there are situations where they are going to be either it makes more financial sense, or they have certain needs that need a special level of care on a consistent basis that you're not able to establish in the home. So then we would help them navigate to a facility. So working with the care manager, you have somebody who knows the systems, knows the local resources very well, and can look at the clinical picture and find a care facility that is going to support their particular needs. And they can help them with all the paperwork and the things that you need to do, the legwork to be able to move into a facility. But we also work to help set up the expectations right away with the care facility and how we expect the care to be provided to this individual. And we want them to know this individual and understand what makes them tick and what kinds of care needs that they have. So setting that expectation early, putting together a care plan meeting so we can make sure that the care reflects the care that they need, and then make sure that the transition is smooth, because it's a huge transition moving from a home after 40, 50 years and then having all new people around and not having their personal effects around, and just it's a
Right.
transition. So we help with that transition and make it as seamless as possible.
Yeah, it's got to be traumatic. You live in a place for 40, 50 years and all of a sudden you're displaced and you're put into surroundings that might not be quite optimum for that senior or elderly individual. There are placement agencies that will place seniors or elderly in a nursing home. Can you contrast what you do, or basically, tell our listeners the difference between what a geriatric care manager does as compared to a placement? So why should a family, they might just want to go to a placement agency to just have their senior or their elder placed in a nursing home. What can a geriatric care manager do differently?
Well, the care managers work across the continuum of care. So it could be somebody who's independent or somebody who needs assisted living, memory care, or skilled nursing. So we can work in any level of care all the way through end of life. But when you use a certified care manager, you're getting someone that has a master's level, and it might be a variety of backgrounds. It could be nursing, social work, rehabilitation counseling, gerontology. There's a lot of different backgrounds, clinical backgrounds that you see. And then they're held to a code of ethics. They have ongoing peer review meetings and ongoing continuing educational requirements so that they're staying on top of the latest information. Care managers will work directly with the client and the family and are really their advocates. Our concern is the client's best interest. We are not paid by a facility like placement people are. And that's the primary difference between us and a placement agency, is our payment source. We don't get any payments whatsoever from our referral sources, whether we're referring them to facilities or home care agencies or other senior services. So there's no temptation or no tendency to steer things from a financial perspective of where that person is going to go for their care. We're more than just a commission salesperson for a facility. We really do the full scope of care across the continuum.
That is good information. And it's good to know because, again, caregivers or loved ones, when they're in a situation where they have to put a loved one into a nursing home or assisted living facility, a lot of times they don't have the education or the knowledge as to what's really in the best interest of their own loved one. A lot of times they just take for granted that, a placement agency is going to place their loved one in the best possible situation for their loved one. But I'm kind of getting from you that that's not always the case.
That can be the case. You have to really vet the person that's going to be working with you, and you want somebody with a minimum standard and code of ethics and really understands the resources and the various systems out there.
Understood. Let me ask you this. So, what is most important for a geriatric care manager for a senior or elderly individual who has just sustained a catastrophic spinal injury? So, talk to our listeners about, in a situation like that, what is something that you would do specific to that type of situation?
Well, it's really important to have an understanding of the clinical picture. So, getting the information from the physicians, from the hospital, discharge records, and health history information to really understand the injury itself and how any other underlying conditions may impact that injury. In an instant like that, we would probably use a catastrophic case manager, a nurse case manager that we would have, because they would be more in tune with the medical issues that are involved with a spinal cord injury.
So you would bring in a nurse case manager that would maybe go with the individual to their doctor appointments or their medical appointments, or review records, just to kind of keep an eye on what's going on and make sure they're getting the best possible care.
Absolutely. They do a lot of medical care coordination. So they may even be doing things like scheduling appointments and requesting medical records, taking them to get a imaging or coordinating surgery and being there the day of surgery. So we can do some really hands-on stuff, because a lot of times folks that we're working with don't have that person to be there for them. And when you're not feeling well and you're in pain or you're sick, it's hard to be your own advocate, and it's hard to stay on top of all the details. You have so many people coming in and out of your door throwing information at you, and it's always better to have an advocate and another person, a second set of eyes and ears to hear the information. And in many cases, communicating to the family or the decision makers for their care who may be in a different part of the country. So kind of that
Or,
central
or
coordinator.
emotionally, they might not just be able to be on top of their game, right? I mean, especially in a catastrophic situation where,
Right.
it's really kind of thrown everyone's world upside down.
Exactly.
All right. So you said you bring in a nurse case manager, like in a spinal cord situation. Are there nurse case managers that might have a specialty, maybe in orthopedic injuries? Is that possible? Or
Yes, that's possible.
okay. So, and I think another common, I don't know if it's common, but another catastrophic injury that I think you might see a lot is traumatic brain injury. Is that correct?
Yeah, we see that a lot, especially when in a sports world. So we do work with some professional sports teams that have issues with head injury and concussion. And then older sports, retired players who need assistance with coordinating their care, as maybe they have dementia developing or other medical conditions, and they have special circumstances that we need to help navigate.
Well, I never thought about that because, this show is just really focusing on the seniors and elderly. But when you said sports, I'm thinking, okay, current players, but like NFL players who develop, they from years and years of getting rammed in the head, especially football players, they develop, they're more susceptible to developing traumatic brain injury and bad things, like you said, dementia as a result. So you actually can work with older individuals who have had sports injuries earlier in their lives.
Yes. Yep. And a lot of them need help navigating too. And you think about it, whether it's football, rugby, soccer, ice hockey, there's all different sports, boxing, where people are sustaining head injuries. And, over time, they may have some special circumstances arise and they need help navigating because they're no longer able to do it for themselves.
So usually with the dementia, it's not like an event that happened. So for instance, like in a spinal cord injury where a senior or elderly individual fell and now they're paralyzed or they've got serious spinal injuries. You can contrast that with the football player, the senior who played, like you said, rugby or boxing or whatever, and developed a head injury, and the dementia kind of developed over a period of years. So I guess that's not as it's something which developed over a long period of time. So the family kind of knew it was happening along the way, and are you kind of brought in to kind of work with them through this, as opposed to the family calling you because dad broke his back when he fell off the porch. That might be a little more of a chaotic situation, correct?
Right. So in the instance of dementia, often people have symptoms or have issues relating to the dementia, maybe even 10 years before they actually get a diagnosis. It might be mild forgetfulness. It might be getting lost in a familiar area while they're driving their car. It might be, starting to forget names. More than just the typical stuff you see with aging. It becomes problematic. And that's when we get the call, is when it becomes problematic and it's difficult for somebody or the family to function given the person's new ability or declining ability to function independently. That's typically when we get the call and when services would be started, because that's when they're really noticing it.
Got it. Got it. How about infectious disease? Are you brought in when you have individuals who might have gotten C. diff or pneumonia, sepsis? Are you brought in those situations as well?
We do. We see that quite a bit, but that generally is not the reason we're being called in. That's usually secondary to something else going on, or while we're managing their care, they get an infection, whether it's because they have a catheter, possibly they get a urinary tract infection, maybe pneumonia, maybe they have swallowing issues and they have aspirated and it leads to pneumonia. So those are conditions that we're always keeping our antenna up on, but that's not typically why we're called. But it definitely is something that needs to be watched, because you don't want, especially an older person who's more susceptible, it can magnify the effects of dementia or the symptoms of dementia. And they're more susceptible to getting sepsis and other problems where, it can be life-threatening.
So you mentioned nurse case manager is another professional that will be part of the team. What other professionals do you bring in? I think we talked about, finances being an issue. I guess maybe you bring in a financial expert. What other professionals would you make part of your team in a situation where you had a senior elder with a catastrophic injury or dementia?
Right. We could potentially bring in that situation would be a certified daily money manager to keep them fiscally organized on a day-to-day basis. If somebody is going to be moving out of their home and into a facility, but they have this house that they lived in for 50 years and is full of stuff and they don't have the physical ability to do something with that, there's a professional called a senior move manager who can help coordinate and orchestrate the move from beginning to end. They could do the space planning in the assisted living and figure out exactly what furniture is going to go to the new location and what's going to be donated, what's going to be shipped to family across the country, and getting the house ready for sale. So that would be another professional. We work with home care companies all the time to bring in hands-on caregivers who are going to help with those activities of daily living. Things like bathing, dressing, toileting, mobility, things like that. And we look for systems. Are there systems in place for medication management? Is transportation available for them to get to and from medical appointments? Can they do those other things that you have to do to be able to live independently, but you might not have to do them every day, like meal planning and cooking and, laundry and things like that, housekeeping, things that you still have to do to maintain, living on your own, but it doesn't have to be done every day.
Great. Well, just really, really good information that you've given us today, Ellen. I can't believe that this 30-minute segment has actually flown by. I mean, we're already at the end of our time here. I want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast today to share your story and informing our listeners about the value of a geriatric care manager. Now,
well, thank you for having me.
Oh, and I'm going to have you back on. So we're going to want to get some more good information from you on some of these, some other categories or issues that involve geriatric care managers. So we're definitely, we want you within arm's length so we can bring you back when we need you. Now, for listeners that want to learn more about geriatric care managers or want to inquire about your services, I know you're in Hunt Valley, Maryland, and we have people all over the country, but I'm sure you could direct somebody who contacted you needing a geriatric care manager or information about a geriatric care manager. I'm sure you could direct them to somebody in their area. So if they want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
They can reach out to me at the Option Group. The phone number there is 410-667-0266 or theoptiongroup.net. And we provide services in Central Maryland, so Baltimore City and County and everything that touches it. If you're looking for somebody in other areas, you can go to the national organization, which is the Aging Life Care Association, and that's aginglifecare.org. That's
a good resource. Thank you so much for that. Ellen, again, thank you for coming on. We're going to have you come on again soon, and we're really looking forward to that happening. That's it for now, my friends. As always, if you have a question regarding an injury to a senior or elderly individual, feel free to email me at info@injuredseniorhotline.com. If you're engaged with the content that we discussed on today's episode, please head over to the show notes where you will find a summary of today's episode and any important links we mentioned on the show today. Also, feel free to reach out to me anytime directly, again, at info@injuredseniorhotline.com. Thanks again for listening to today's show. Be sure to tune in to next week's show and have a safe one. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Injured Senior Podcast with Steve H. Heisler. If you enjoyed the podcast, please rate, subscribe, review, and share on Apple, Google, or wherever you get your podcasts. To find out more or to get help anytime, go to injuredseniorhotline.com or call 855-622-6530. We'll see you next time.